Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking into the highly requested subject of the Pariahs, and the story behind them and their predecessors, the Imperiatti. This is one with lots of twists and turns, and a lot of information to sift through, so I may have to do a few videos on this, looking at it with different ideas or angles in mind. For now though, let's get right into it. This is going to be focusing on Felix's lore primarily, and potentially another time we're going to focus more on Elodie, and then there might be even more after that. We'll see. So, the Pariahs, who are they? Well, the Pariahs were introduced within Felix's lore initially, describing them as a group of teenagers who had all lost a parent or loved one to a mysterious dark force. They didn't know what this dark force was, but it's pretty much guaranteed to be the entity. The Pariah group was made up of 5 members. We know 2 of them, these being Felix Richter and Elodie Rakoto, the name Pariah being someone that has been soundly rejected by their community. This pretty much lines up with what they are, as after claiming sightings of this dark force, everyone thinks they're a little bit crazy. Now, the Pariahs were the children of a group named the Imperiatti, at least some of them were, Felix and Elodie at least. So thinking more about the Imperiatti group, let's look at the names of Felix's parents, which are Janos and Ursula. Richter, presumably. These are pretty interesting names, and ones which I doubt come down to a mistake or something like that. I get the feeling these names are pretty intentionally picked. Where so many other characters' relatives' names aren't mentioned, the fact they are mentioned here means there is at least some intention or purpose behind them. In DBD lore, names aren't really mentioned unless they're going somewhere narrative-wise or have an important link to the primary characters. It's not a throwaway line saying Felix's parents, it specifically says Janos and Ursula in the very first line of his lore. My immediate thought when I saw these names, having studied classics for a good 4 or so years, was that these names sounded familiar in the context of mythology, and more so Roman mythology. Romans often are used as the staple of human civilization. They are seen as almost godlike in their priorities, innovation, and way of life and thought. A lot of what the Romans did was ahead of their time, and things they did are still being drawn on today. We know that in some universe within DBD's multiverse, mythology is real due to the ancient Greece-inspired sets which specifically draw on mythology, introducing whole new characters like the Minotaur. We further know this from cosmetics such as Clown's Lord of the Underworld outfit that reads, "Twisted by his exploration through the fog, myths of the Greek god Hades reshaped the clown's repulsive body." This states that Hades, a literal god, does exist in at least one of the universes within the multiverse. This isn't too much of a revelation, as we already know that the multiverse basically means that an infinite amount of variations on things are possible, and we already know there is something more powerful than humans as the entity exists in the world. So, Janos and Ursula. First of all, it's very possible we could connect these two to the Greek mythology world, as a lot of Roman mythology is them just plagiarizing the Greeks, with stories like the Aeneid being created because of the Odyssey. Although Janos isn't a direct link, Janus is, which is a negligible difference in spelling. Janus was the god of beginnings and transitions in Roman mythology, and presided over passages, gates, and endings, as well as in transitional periods such as from war to peace. Further, as a god of beginnings and transitions, both in literal and abstract ways, he was also responsible for motion, changes, and time. He was present in the beginning of the world, guarding the gates of heaven, and he also presided over the creation of religion, life, and even the gods. He was probably considered the most important Roman god, and his name was the first to be mentioned in prayers, regardless of which god the worshipper wanted to pray to. Now, Ursula's name could potentially be inspired by any number of sea goddesses that go by this name. The same thing applies though, it's basically that she's a goddess, or it comes from a goddess. Okay, so that's enough being sensible and looking over the lore and facts and stuff. At some point we're gonna have to make a little leap of faith. So let's go. My theory is that Felix's parents, first of all, were gods, and further, Felix was created for the purpose of halting the entity. In fact, the presence of mythological gods on current-day Earth is because their world in their branch of the multiverse has already been consumed by the entity, which is something it's totally done, and they are now on our known version of Earth, searching for the entity in attempts to stop it, blending in with the human race. Oh yeah, and Felix's father is probably the Observer, based on the whole Janus thing, being there at the beginning of time and generally just as a god of time. I mean, the Observer is literally that within the entity's realm. Maybe we can talk about that another time. Looking into Felix's lore further, we have his parents referred to as being in an ancient society. Let's read some more about Felix. He wasn't sure when the architectural bug bit, but when it did, it bit hard, and he knew that despite his family's legacy, he would one day design buildings that would inspire the world. By 23, he was considered an architectural prodigy, having won the Swiss Architect Medal and the German National Design Award. Yet despite his success, Felix couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that his success had more to do with luck and connections than talent and hard work. This is really interesting. Another interesting excerpt is this. Felix Richter joined young Felix in the library, where he helped him build elaborate wooden models of buildings while telling him wild stories about his secret club and the ancient battle against a dark and ominous force. Stories, Felix was sure. His father had made up to make his Imperiatti group sound cooler than it actually was. Every summer, Felix would accompany his parents to the island, where members of the Imperiatti would encourage their children to network and forge lifelong connections. We have reference to rare books, an ancient battle against a dark and ominous force, and a need for the Imperiatti's children to connect and to network. Almost like they're preparing them for the same thing, or more so their upcoming futures inside the entity's realm. Almost like the Imperiatti or the parents are planning to send them into the entity's realm for the purpose of trying to figure it out or potentially defeat the entity, as they themselves as gods would be too valuable. After this, in Felix's lore, likely the Blight's laboratory, but possibly Vigo's, is discovered on Dire Island. It's really confusing, the relationship between Blight and Vigo. That might be another thing to clarify in a video. I'm pretty sure Blight's lab is pre-Entity's realm and Vigo's lab is within the Entity's realm, in the Void sub-realm. It's very possible it's a multiverse, same person kind of thing. Dire Island in real life is located in Bermuda. Bermuda, huh? In this lab, they seemingly discover the pustula serum that we see within the entity's realm. At least it seems so, because it's directly related to the Blight, and it's a serum that makes you stronger, so I would guess so. This suggests that the pustula serum isn't a product of the entity, but instead an invasive substance, or as previously established, likely a pathogen. The next thing that happens is quite important and occurs after they pick up the vial. Before they could examine the contents, the ground seemed to shake beneath their feet, and a hissing sound filled their ears. A strange fog suddenly appeared, and giant claws seemed to burst from the ground as dark imagination mingled with reality to terrorize them. Before they understood what was happening, Felix's father and several other parents came to their rescue, using strange tools and objects to protect them. First of all, this is odd. Strange tools and objects. This is not a description you would likely get in the modern day. We pretty much right now can describe almost anything with some description aside strange tools and objects. That is so nondescript that it makes it pretty likely that their parents were whipping out their godly weapons, or potentially some form of weapon from another universe within the multiverse. We know that there definitely are variations on things we know in our world to be different within the multiverse, as the Observer specifically mentions the differentiated milk he drinks and radio he listens to from different Terra worlds. The way they're depicted though as tools and objects makes me think of the Observer's Auris, which allows him to directly interact with the fog, a byproduct of the entity's presence and seemingly a tendril of the entity itself. So, potentially the Imperiatti are the ones who have constructed the Auris, potentially from the very fibers of the entity, or more so some kind of godly fiber or otherworldly fiber, a universal stardust kind of thing. My point being, if we look at what auric cells are, presumably cells being the smaller part that makes up the larger part, it reads, very little is known of the entity's biological workings, and the exact purpose of the auric cells still elude me. There are nevertheless strong correlations to be made between the cell and the entity's faculty to shape the world that imprisons us. Are they the primordial building blocks to everything we see within the fog? Can we harness their power? And this is in Vigo's notebook, which is the laboratory they're probably not in, as that's in the entity's realm, suggesting the Imperiatti, the parents, have already studied the available texts and constructed the tool of the Auris capable of peering into the fog or they are made up of the same material, the auric cells, as the entity. Maybe they're even the same species as the entity. This also kind of works as the parents seem to arrive kind of at the perfect moment, almost like they're looking into the Aurist themselves. Why would the parents suddenly appear at this random camp? Let's continue. If it's not Vigo's lab and it's Blight, then it still seems to work, as what they're discovering is the blighted serum and potentially Vigo's journal. It's possible that this is where Vigo first entered the realm also, or even that Vigo is an Imperiatti member himself. Talbot Grimes too, maybe. It's all possible, honestly. We can be pretty sure they're dealing with the same substance at least, as the Vigo-related survivor cosmetics have a very similar depiction to the non-Vigo specific ones, meaning either way the research and discovery is likely similar, potentially another product of the multiverse. Felix stared at the scene in shock and disbelief. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming or living one of his father's ridiculous supernatural stories. By the time he realized it wasn't a dream, it was all over. The Pariahs were safe, but their parents had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Presumably this means that the entire Imperiatti were taken in this instance, which would suggest potentially that their parents were not creating them for the purpose of feeding them off to a spider god, but instead needed to protect them for some greater purpose if they're willing to sacrifice themselves. All of themselves too, not just one of the parents. All of them whip out their objects and tools, potentially Aurises, and go toward the entity that is mid-attack. This means that the children are important. Very important. What this tells us about many of the characters within the realm is that they are there likely because the entity has specifically been searching for the gods and their children in hopes of wiping them all out, or potentially wanting them specifically. My guess is that it comes down to these children of gods being the perfect people to infinitely drain of hope, as they literally do not tie to the extent of a regular human, yet still have the ignorant mind of a human who hasn't seen the destruction the entity has caused in other worlds like the Imperiatti have. For every one of these gods' kids that are caught, the entity grows larger, and the more worlds it consumes, the more unstoppable it becomes. Which is what the Imperiatti parents speak of, a great war on its way between darkness and light. Think of it like Thanos collecting the Infinity Stones for his gauntlet, except with like 25 survivors, or more specifically, 5. Why 5? Well, because there were 5 members of the Pariah group, presumably these 5 being of importance as the Imperiatti wanted them all to meet and obtain connections with one another. They had to be special. After the disappearance of the parents, the Pariahs attempt to search for them, connecting with people from all over the world, which I guess is how they got the initial 5 together. This also suggests that the Pariah members are from all over the world. This is just the beginning. This is a really tough one because there is potentially just so much in here, it goes way deeper. We made a few discoveries today. This was a lot of speculation, but I think with more time I could hopefully bring some better clarity. I'm just very busy at the moment, I'm sorry, but we'll get this solved. For now though, I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you think we should explore this more. I personally would like to. Thanks, and goodbye. An additional thank you to LHPL3, as well as my other members for supporting the channel.